thank you. As I said to Kamla, very happy to be back and talking to our friends across the globe. It's always interesting to hear different views. So this is something that's close to my heart. So I've been asked to speak for about, what is it, Frances, 8 minutes
about
or so?
8 minutes, yes, about 8 minutes.
Okay. Wave at me if I go over, but I shouldn't. And I thought I'd talk about, and I borrowed liberally from another address, and perhaps I must give you the background to this. Is in 2019, I asked our chairman of our board to talk to local company secretaries here in South Africa. They had a conference, an annual conference at the Chartered Governance Institute. It was then the Institute of Chartered Secretaries. And I gave him a topic, and the topic was, what does a chairperson expect from his or her company secretary? And what I'm going to read to you now is some extracts from that speech that he gave to company secretaries in South Africa, and there were about 180 to 200 company secretaries who listened to this. And I thought it was a good segue to start this discussion, just to hear from somebody that's not, or that uses the services as we think of it, and just to reflect upon what he said. And he started off with saying, it's the wrong question. It's not about what does the chairperson expects from the company secretary, because that assumes an asymmetry of power, and that there is a dual responsibility between the company secretary and the chairman. And the question surmises or supposes that the company secretary is simply responding to the wishes of the chairman and the board, and that is something of the past. In South African law, you then went on to say the duties of a company secretary is set out in Section 88 of the Companies Act. And very specifically, the section of the Act in South Africa starts with, these duties include but are not limited to. So it already explains and sets out that there may be a list of 8 or so statutory duties, but they are actually much vaster and further than what is set out in the Act. And our corporate governance code, the King IV Code of Corporate Governance, also sets out our duties. And from a listing requirements perspective, we also have additional duties. He then went on to say that these duties require absolute faith and trust between the board and the company secretary, as discovering that these duties are not executed will be too late. You can't not do what you're supposed to do. And he then went on to talk about the attributes necessary for an effective company secretary, noting that these have broadened considerably. And he referenced an article by Lauren Wolfson, which I think we all know, which is the company secretary as polymath. Just stating all the various skills that we need, which includes communication skills, attention to detail, organizational skills, resilience, tenacity, drive, tolerance, respect, patience, humility, trust and integrity, independence, emotional intelligence, deep understanding of the business, and potential for growth. He said this is a mouthful, and the company secretary can only acquire such a broad array of skills by lifelong learning, as it is not available in a course anywhere at university. He further went on to talk about ESG, and I'll briefly just highlight what he said. The world is experiencing a fundamental change in the construct and the expectations of the company. Focus has shifted to ESG, highlighting corporate social responsibility, as we all know. The business of business has changed fundamentally, and profits at all costs is obviously a thing of the past. And in this change, the battle for sound corporate governance and for exemplary ethical conduct is required. In preventing corporate failures, we should look to company secretaries to ensure that they are confident enough to ask the tough questions of executives and directors alike. Company secretaries are guardians of the battle for corporate governance. Boards and executives should get together for a common purpose in changing culture around a common ethical purpose. Cultural change in this instance requires leadership. And company secretaries who exist as a mere note taker in this process will be left far behind. And then moving on to a bit more of the softer skills, and you will remember from my previous address to this forum that I often speak about the softer skills, but still referencing some of the items that the chairman spoke of. He says boards are made up of different individuals with different experiences, and in many instances, board members have been in leadership positions, and we know this, elsewhere before being appointed. Holding all of this together is a distinct art form because the interests and experience of the various board members should be accommodated while constructing a common purpose, of course. The company secretary is the only one qualified to negotiate this minefield, being the only person who does not have vested interests. The modern day company has complex board processes, and the company secretary is the officer who should ensure that these matters are adequately managed, so to allow the board to arrive at sustainable decisions based on quality papers and good organization of board meetings, which lay the foundation and is just as important as the governance advice provided during the meeting. Rushed decisions will help no one in court. And then in closing that address, he said the following: the challenge that confronts us is that the role of the company secretary is provided for in law only in part and assumed for in the rest. The statutory part of the company secretary's duties are actually but a fraction of the responsibilities. There needs to be ongoing work to elaborate on the duties and responsibilities and to ensure the company secretary occupies the appropriate organizational role and is given license to operate effectively. And then returning to the famous Lauren Wolfson article, we should note that the role of the company secretary has changed and the extent of the change is significant. The role is no longer the same as it was a decade or even 5 years ago. There is wide recognition that the nomenclature falls short of the duties undertaken. And he then closed with the nomenclature should change to that of governance professional. And I will stop there, but because I think it gives us lots of food for thought. And it is something that is very close to my heart, and we're already talking about changing nomenclature within our own department in Old Mutual as well, because I sometimes think people think we type other people's stuff, which is not the case. So we also have that challenge here to try and explain to people what we do, and nomenclature does go a long way in trying to address that. But I think for an opening, Frances, that is what I wanted to say, and we can then listen to the other panelists and then take questions and engage after.
Yes, Elsabe, thank you so much. You're right. We have a lot to unpack from that speech that you've quoted from, and I'm looking forward to sort of having the open discussion once the panelists have finished their part. All right, but thank you so much. Pleasure. All right, thank you. So, Kathryna, you're up next.
Okay, thanks, Frances, and thank you to Kamala and the CCGI for inviting me. I fully support the important work that the CCGI is doing in the area of governance. I know it's been said a few times this morning, but I want to reiterate the role of the company secretary has evolved past the traditional secretary role, administrative duties, taking minutes, preparing patches for board and subcommittee meetings, making sure that the clock works in the boardroom, you know, preparing lunch and ensuring that directors, you know, have their bellies full. Today, and perhaps since the global financial crisis, there's a greater focus on governance and transparency, along with tighter regulations, and all this has inevitably led to the need for a corporate secretary that is a leader in this critical area of governance. In addition, the expectation of shareholders and other stakeholders are that the corporate secretary will play a more integral role, a more critical role. And this has also contributed to the rise in the importance of the role of the corporate secretary. In Trinidad and Tobago, the legislation also underscores and speaks to the value and importance of the evolving role of the corporate secretary. So, for example, in the Companies Act and the Securities Act, the corporate secretary is defined as an officer, if you want to call it a high-ranking officer, along with the managing director, the general manager, the CFO, treasurer, other senior officers. And while along with that comes liability, it also speaks to the importance of the role of the corporate secretary. In our Companies Act, the required knowledge and expertise are clearly outlined for a corporate secretary of a public company. So that just goes to show you that it is statutorily defined and important that directors choose corporate secretaries of a particular level of knowledge and experience, particularly in a public company. So in the last panel, Deborah would have outlined the liabilities of corporate secretaries in the Trinidad and Tobago context. And the corporate secretary, along with directors and other senior officers, have a fiduciary duty to act honestly and in good faith with a view to the best interests of the company and to exercise the care, diligence, and skill that a reasonably prudent person would exercise in comparable circumstances. So we are held to a high standard, just as the directors and other senior officers. And of course, we face liability if there's breach. So in addition to all the administrative duties that we would traditionally perform, how has the role evolved over the years? And this, I'm speaking from the Trinidad and Tobago perspective here, and from my own experience as well. So the corporate secretary is in charge of compliance, particularly with respect to the relevant laws and the regulators, so the stock exchange, the SEC, and some corporate secretaries now even carry the entire compliance portfolio, for example, at the company where I serve as corporate secretary. So that is a big change there. Someone, I can't remember which panelist mentioned signing authority. In many companies, the corporate secretary has the signing authority to buy any company. And in my company in particular, yes. So that speaks to the value of the role and the evolving importance of the role to a company. The corporate secretary also, in many cases, are required to draft and champion the corporate governance policy of the company. And in some companies, they are required to review all policies before they are submitted to the board for approval. And the corporate secretary also plays the role of an advisor on policy, as that falls under the whole governance umbrella. As you know, the corporate secretary is lovingly referred to as the conscience of the board. And the role is evolving to the point where we are now strategic partners and advisors to the directors and to the chairman. We ensure that the agenda is not just printed correctly on the instructions of the chairman, but we sit with the chairman and we set an agenda that drives proper decision making and allows the directors to carry out their fiduciary duty. This has been mentioned as well a lot today. We no longer sit like wallflowers taking minutes. We are expected now to speak up in the boardroom. We are no longer the silent minute takers. In fact, as someone said as well earlier, I think it was Dr. Prasad, that it was a point that was raised, you need to speak up a little more in the boardroom. So that, I remember when I first became a corporate secretary, I was told, don't say anything. You're not a director, you're just a corporate secretary. Now, the role has evolved to the point where if you don't say something, you are being held accountable. So the corporate secretary is also the chief liaison among the board, management, and shareholders. Many times, the corporate secretary is the person to whom directors, executives, managers, shareholders will come to for governance advice, and sometimes other advice. We bridge that gap between management and the board. We help implement the decisions of the board after board meetings. The corporate secretary is that person who the executive team will come to liaise with, to explain the perspective of the board, and to, just make sure that that transition is there and that everybody's on the same page. We also liaise with external auditors, external attorneys, bankers, shareholders, other stakeholders on board governance issues. We work closely with the Chief Internal Office Auditor. Someone earlier mentioned risk management as falling under our purview. And I think definitely we are a joint partner in managing risk in our organizations. We also assist with whistleblowing matters and so on, because the corporate secretary is seen as that confidential vault of information and in whom key officers can confide. So we have an emerging role there. Someone also mentioned ESG, and that is, we are evolving to the point where in some organizations, the corporate secretary is responsible for the ESG agenda and for ensuring that the overall strategy of the corporation involves ESG. Certainly in my role, ESG has become a very important aspect. So in my view, the corporate secretary is a key partner to the CEO. I know the chairman of the CCGI mentioned, is the chief governance officer really the CEO, or does it fall to the corporate secretary? And I think both have a role to play. I think the corporate secretary's role has evolved to the point where, yes, a change in nomenclature is due. The word secretary, could lead others to think it's something less than it really is. The chief governance officer is an apt name in my view. The CEO, of course, also has a role, but the corporate secretary is a partner to the CEO, is relied upon not just to present information and facts and generate reports, but also to interpret the reports, present critical analysis to the CEO and to the board, make strategic recommendations, etc. So at the end of the day, the question as to whether this is our next step forward, in my view, yes, and I look forward to a very spirited discussion along these lines. So that's it from my end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathryna. That also was quite interesting and broad-based, covering a lot of aspects of what all of us are now being asked to do and what is expected as now our basic function, what we would have never thought of doing previously. It's now expanded to things like ESG, risk, and so on. And I'm looking forward to talking about the synergistic role that the corporate secretary now plays, and the fact that that role actually brings value to the organization that is tangible. All right, so we'll get to that.
Yes, yes.
Thank you very much, Kathryna, for those valuable comments. Taru, you are next. Welcome, welcome. You follow the two ladies.
Yeah, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon for some. I'm from Brazil, and I'm representing IBGC. The IBGC is the Brazilian Corporate Governance Institute. For those who doesn't know, IBGC is a Brazilian think tank to promote corporate governance. It was born in 1995 as an institute of directors, but soon changed to a multi-stakeholders institute. In 2004, the IBGC recommended in the third edition of the Best Practices Code that each company had to have a board secretary, at that time with an administrative role. In 2010, we made a trip. It's a technical tour, governance technical tour to Europe. And we met Mr. Simon Osborne. Mr. Simon was at that time president of ICSA, today Chartered Governance Institute. And we learned a little bit more about the importance of the role of corporate secretary. At that time, because of that conversation we had with him, we joined a group of people, board secretaries, to start studying the function organized here in Brazil. And we realized that the role in general was not adequately known, with some exceptions, just some exceptions. And consequently, we had no, the power had no proper empowered and trained. Important to say that the function was not, and still is not regulated here in Brazil. In 2011, the IBGC promoted the first training program on how to create a board secretariat, an area of secretariat. Recently, we changed the name of the course to how to build a governance area, and not anymore secretariat because of the name. This is to reflect the evolution of the scope and the responsibilities of the area and the professional. This course is now on its 54th edition since 2011. And is the second bestseller at IBGC, and has trained more than 1,500 people. In 2012, we did our first research to map the professionals. At that time, still the scope of responsibility was very focused on operational and administrative roles. In 2015, we published a booklet on how to build a governance secretariat. At that moment, we changed the designation from corporate secretary to governance secretary of the professional. Since the profession were at that time serving not only boards, not anymore boards, but also the committees, the fiscal council, shareholders, and sometimes management also. We were very touched by the paper, the company secretary as a polymath in 2014 from the IFC. In 2018, we launched a series of papers clarifying the role of governance secretary. In 2012, we changed the denomination to governance officer. In Latam, the term secretary, at least here in Brazil, the term secretary creates confusion. It distorts the understanding of the role because we translated literally secretary from English. And also, the secretary induces to a more administrative function, and therefore limiting the evolution of the role and the value added to the company as a consequence. We now, IBGC, use the term governance officer to refer the role performed by a senior and qualified professional who leads the governance area of the organization, of any organization. At the end of 2021, we launched a governance officer graduation program with 80 hours. This is the IBGC longest program of all the programs that we run. In 2022, this year, we published a research and a new governance officer manual. It is available in English is also at IBGC website. And now this manual focuses on the dual role, full role. Currently, we are on the hard working for the consolidation of the governance officer graduation program. We are currently in the 4th edition, and we will have the 4th edition at the end of this year, 2022 year. We are also working on a governance officer certified program to be launched next year. This is our target. There are some challenges that we highlight here. The proper understanding, proper understanding in the organizations in general of the importance of the role and the value it can create to the organization. Another challenge is the adequate position of this professional in the organizational structure. Why? Because it's necessary for a proper autonomy and impartiality or independence. Consequently, the adequate compensation. Another challenge is that we decided to use an English name for the role. Yeah. This is sometimes not well received here in Brazil, but we did a very strong and hard survey and discussions, a lot of discussions, what would be the proper name for this professional. And we decided to adopt a governance officer because it reflects better the position of the professional responsible for the governance in the organizations. The term governance officer refers to the role, not the job title. Each company has its own job title according to its role. Yeah. Another challenge is that it's increasing, but modestly. The companies adopt or put it in the statutory of the company. Yeah, why? To formalize the responsibility, because its professional is responsible for the governance, so it has to be appropriately demanded or in the statutory of the company. Also, regulations in law. We don't have regulations in law that demand, that include this professional here in Brazil. We recently made a survey this last year, and we had 323 valid responses by professionals in the area of governance. And some important highlights. Half of them have another function inside the company. So when you have another function, you share your time, you share focus. So you don't have only focus on governance, but you have focusing in other duties. Yeah? Equally, they respond for both to board or to CEO, depending on the role, the dual roles or the 3 roles. Yeah. 30% are lawyers. Interesting, because in the first survey we did it in 1915. The majority, more than 60%, were lawyers. Now, in this survey, 30% are lawyers. The average monthly compensation, it's average. So we have, the range is very, very vast and big, but an average, only to have an idea, is $3.5 thousand, equivalent in dollars. One good thing is that 85% have MBA or above. So it's a recognition that this function, the role, needs qualification. But the main activities are still focused on administrative roles in general. Yeah, board agenda and minutes, follow up with board decisions, and to be referencing in governance in the company. So it's growing, it's a growing role, but it's still administrative in general. Okay.
Thank you, Turu. Thank you for sharing some of the statistical data that clearly your organization has been able to gather over a period of time. And it's always good when we're having these conversations to be talking from a factual standpoint and not just from feelings. So I very much appreciate, and I think the audience will have appreciated that. You know, I'm taking just a few themes that have come out from the discussion with all of you distinguished panelists. And, you know, Turu ended on a note saying it's still administrative. Elsabe noted that, you know, sometimes she feels she has to teach people about what you guys do and not just taking notes, transcribing for people. You know, Kathryna mentioned when she started, clearly not so much now, but when she started, she was told, you know, you're the corporate secretary, you're not really supposed to say anything. You're supposed to stay quiet. Now, given what we are seeing and the fact that the corporate secretary is in many instances performing several governance related functions such as compliance, risk management, we mentioned ESG, and we'll talk about that in more detail and so on. Sometimes they're performing the functions, but in other cases, there are people also reporting to them who perform those functions. How do we, because there's always been a battle that we fight as corporate secretaries to be recognized as adding as a function and a non-operational person, adding tangible value to the business. How do you see, first of all, that a change of name will help that? And two, how would the new corporate secretary / chief governance officer actually be able to communicate and translate what they are now doing in the organization as something that adds tangible value? I throw that out to the, anyone can go first, unless you'd like me to pick one of you.
I can go, Frances. I'll start.
Yes.
So I guess from a personal perspective, the name will not make me more or less efficient in my role. So let's just park that. I firmly believe that it is about owning your space and owning what it is that you are supposed to be doing. And it's, as we discussed, a wide range of statutory duties and a wide range of governance duties. And a lot of that is about advice to management and advice to the board. So it is very much an advice function. You can, if you're lazy, sit and do admin, because that's the easy part, right? To do the bit of minutes and whatever, because that's what we have to do that as well. But I think getting out there and having conversations with the stakeholders are the important part. And the name, I think for those of us that are in the role for a listed entity, it doesn't really matter. What it does matter is for my team. So the juniors who go off in, and we've got a vast, complex financial services organization with over 300 subsidiaries. And I have company secretaries going into all of those subsidiaries and having to face senior management people and providing them with governance advice. I think for them, it makes a huge, huge difference about what they are called, because there are youngsters starting out, and being called a secretary versus being called somebody charged with governance will make, for some reason, a huge difference. So I thought I'd start the conversation there. It depends on where in the hierarchy you are. And it also depends, it always depends on the individual and whether you own the space that you are provided with. And of course, if you are provided with the authority to do so by your board, because if they don't allow you to do that, then the battle cannot be won. So it is getting good board members to understand the value of your function and how you protect them from getting into trouble.
And wouldn't you say, Elsabe, picking up on that it's a question of the corporate secretary actually being at a certain level of seniority? It shouldn't be a question. I want to throw that out. Should it be a question? Should it be a matter of choice? Or should it be that because the corporate secretary's role is now turning into a governance officer, which over the last 10 to 15 years, we have seen that governance has taken a prominent position within companies as far as shareholder activism goes. Shouldn't it be, I'll throw it out to Kathryna, shouldn't it be that it should be an automatic thing that the corporate secretary / chief governance officer, because of the importance of governance within recent times, shouldn't that person be automatically considered as being someone at the senior level of the organization and not something that is left to the discretion of the board?
Yes, I definitely agree. You know, it's not a matter of opinion. I mean, and in Trinidad, our legislation speaks to us being senior officers, you know. And I think by and large in Trinidad, the role is respected, and it is, more or less, and it is in that level, the C-suite level, and, you know, placed in the organizational structure in such a way that the value of the role is recognized. I don't know if it is that way in other jurisdictions, but I think certainly for us, over the last decade, we've seen the rise in the importance of the role and its placement at that level in the organizations.
And Turu, you ended off your comments around the role being seen based on the data that your institute had collected, that it was still heavily administrative and so on. Any views on this topic here? In terms of how the corporate secretary, is it really seen as more than just administrative generally, in your view?
The view of the importance of the role is changing. Not as maybe not as the path that we want to or we would like to, but is changing. The axis is positive. And also it depends on the maturity of governance when you are, not only the company, but the country that we are. The governance is growing. The evolution of the governance is growing very rapidly and changing very deeply sometimes. The demand for a professional that support the governance and the evolution of the governance in the organization is also changing in a positive way. When I was a governance officer with dual roles, because I had dual roles already, and when was hierarchically linked to the CEO or to the chairman, made a lot of difference in the governance system in the organization, because I could dedicate properly and had the power, not power for power, but the authority to implement evolution of the governance in the company. So my experience, my practical experience says that when the company, the governance of the company is evolving, also your role is evolving, but you have to be prepared. Yeah? Constantly prepared, because you have to be in advance prepared.
Thank you, Turu. I believe it was Elsabe who mentioned something around the purpose of the company and the role that the corporate secretary may have to play in ensuring that that is always remembered and executed by the directors. Now, you know, corporate governance has evolved where shareholder rights are not seen as, or as no longer treated as the primary, so exclusively primary. It's about all stakeholders. What in your view, Elsabe, is the role of the corporate secretary slash, and I'll call it chief governance officer from now on, in terms of making sure that all stakeholders interests are balanced accordingly, and in the context of the company's purpose?
Yeah, and Frances, it's actually a very easy question to answer, because in South Africa, our governance code is quite clear about a stakeholder inclusive approach, and that the board needs to consider all stakeholders in making its decisions. And I see my role, and I've had to step in from time to time, and how you do it will depend on the individual company secretary. So some people will do it in the boardroom, other people will do it in a one-on-one call with the relevant committee chairman. But from time to time, one does need to raise the fact that a specific discussion is perhaps focused on one stakeholder, for instance, the shareholders only. And it is our duty, because that is the privilege of the position, is that you sit in an observing role. And if you are the group company secretary like I am, I sit in all the committee meetings and the board meetings, so you see the discussions happening and you can pick up the themes that need to be addressed. And I think it's about just holding up that mirror, because the committee members are in the discussion at that point in time, and it's about just understanding when to step in, and whether it's something for that discussion or whether it's a discussion to be had after the meeting in preparation for the next meeting. It's just to say perhaps we need to think about the following stakeholders as well. So it is a very, very important role, and it's an influential role, but it can't be done with a hammer.
Yes, definitely not. Yes, go ahead.
No, so I just wanted to make that point, and each company secretary will be different. I do it in my style, other people will do it differently, but it is about making sure that you influence the discussions in the right way, because that's why we are there, to hold that up to everyone, management included.
Very good. I understand we have a hand up. I'm gonna continue that conversation around and bring it to the ESG point, but we have a hand up. I believe, Arthur, you have your hand up. Yes.
Yes,
Excellent.
thank you, Francis. But my question is related exactly to the subject we are discussing, because we can understand the role the CGO is becoming more and more complex. So my question is related to Elsabe and Kathryna experience, and I'm not asking Teru because I'm a Brazilian, so I know how Teru thinks. But I would like to know your perception about the importance of our role as CGO, and how is the compliance with the laws and regulation, especially or particularly for listed companies. I know this is a big issue because, you know, listed companies is a reality in every country. And what is exactly the fiduciary's risk and responsibilities for a person that is acting as a CGO or company secretary? And another question, if you don't mind, Francis, another question is how is the certification related to all these new responsibilities? Who is the person or the organization that will provide this certification, and how this certification will be used for laws and regulations?
Okay, those are several questions there.
Sorry,
thank
Francis.
you very much. No, thank you very much, Arthur. Thank you. We welcome the engagement. So I don't know if Kathryna and Elsabe, you want to flip coins as to who's going first to answer, because he left out Teru because he's not addressing Teru because he's also from Brazil. So would you like to start?
Okay. If I could recall I think it was the second question, Arthur, that you asked, was the risk for corporate secretaries and listed companies with respect to, I guess, filings and so on. And that is outlined in the law. So you have very strict reporting requirements. And should you fail to do so, the company is fined. And they're very, very rigorous in our jurisdiction. You know, they look very closely at your filing obligations, and if you miss, you are fined. And of course, there's the overarching fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of the company, which would be in the best interest of the shareholders and the employees and the company at large. And if you breach that, of course, you're open and liable to suit along with directors. I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah. The other question, I was trying to take some notes.
But what I understood, Kathryna, is
yes,
just when you just do these documentations, you are already in compliance with the regulations. This is what you will answer. So every company secretary needs to prepare all this documentation and send to the organization in charge of the listed companies.
Yes.
Yes, that is correct.
So we file several documents.
And be certified or not has some relationship with this?
You mean whether the chief governance officer is certified?
Yes, yeah.
So
if he has, or this person has benefits being certified or not?
No, well, I mean, legally speaking, right, in the legislation, we have the requirements for corporate secretaries of publicly listed companies. Certification may or may not be one of the requirements. Experience, attorney at law for a number of years. I don't have the act in front of me, but I can pull it up. But it does not stipulate any particular. It doesn't stipulate any particular certification.
That's
Section
correct.
63, Francis.
That's right. And you must be, for a publicly listed company in Trinidad and Tobago, you must be either an attorney at law or someone who the directors feel has the experience and capabilities to perform the responsibility. Now that second
Right, so-
option puts a lot on the directors because they have to make sure that that person is suitable, which is where maybe your question on certification becomes valid, because the person should have some sort of qualifications, etc., etc. Gone are the days when it's a good buddy that you would put there long ago.
Yeah, so it's only in your best interest to become certified in some way.
Correct. And an accountant as well is also a profession that is
accountant.
allowed to be a corporate secretary.
Yes.
Yes, yes, Faye just, right. I said it at the same time. Correct. Thank you, Faye.
Yes.
Thank you.
But
Yes.
a certification as a corporate secretary.
Yes.
You
It's not a
wanted
legal
to
requirement.
respond from a South African perspective?
Okay, Saroni.
That's
Is it Saroni? Am I pronouncing it properly? Saroni or Saron? Please correct me.
Yeah, it's Saron, Francis.
Hi, Francis. It's Yvonne.
Hi, Saron.
How are you doing?
Very good. How are you?
I am well, thanks. Listening, working at the same time. Kathryna, it's so nice to see you in this forum. I have a comment. It's more of a comment than a question. You know, we're talking about the role of the company secretary, and we've evolved so much. I mean, we saw what Lord Esher said in the 1800s. We saw what Lord Denning said in the 1940s, and it's all there on paper. It's in the legislation, it's written, you know, we report to the board. Yet somehow in our practical day-to-day experience, the respect somehow is not there. It's all written, it's enshrined in law and officer of the company. But somehow, you know, unfortunately, I think we need more training for board members to really, you know, and that's why the work of the institute is so important, to get the full understanding. Yes, it's all written there, but the actual day-to-day interaction with the secretary is important and deserving of respect. You know, unfortunately, you would hear me stress on this because I have been the recipient of some disrespect. I think it has something to do with my age as my gender. You know, many times I'm the youngest woman. I'm the youngest in the room.
Yes,
you know?
yes.
So I think that has something to do with it as well. But the training is so important to really understand what the role is. It's all written there. It's all written there. And somebody made the point about, you know, it is not just the company secretary, yes, chairman, no chairman. There's a mutual respect and trust that has to be built. I expect, as a company secretary, I expect certain things of the chairman and the board as well. It's two hands to clap, you know. So I just wanted to make those points and put that out there. Thanks.
And Francis, if I may, I just want to underscore that point made by Sharon is a very important one, that the boards need to be educated as well. And that's why I fully support the work of the CCGI, because, you know, they have training for directors as well. It is important to communicate and keep them abreast of trends, emerging trends in corporate governance and the emerging role of the corporate secretary. And that is the only way we're going to move forward with everyone being on the same page.
Totally agreed. And I want to just also put it out there in terms of how governance has evolved and the importance of it. The corporate secretary actually, in my view, and we can throw this out for debate, is in control to a large extent how much your board pays attention to you, how much significance your board gives to your role. Because as the corporate secretary, you have a responsibility to highlight the governance trends that are happening and are unfolding on a particular in your company and on the world stage, and where things are going. And therefore, you as the corporate secretary have a key role to not just influence the things that are happening outside of you, but also influence how your role is perceived.
That is true,
by the
Frances,
board.
but sometimes a prophet is not respected in his own country. Sometimes you need a little external help. But no, I take your point. The corporate secretary has a duty to point out emerging trends and to communicate to the board. But yes, sometimes a little external help goes a long way.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I don't know, any comments from Elsabe or Turu on that?
One thing that I learned performing as a corporate governance officer in relation to education is delivery. Is not an easy thing to educate not only management but also board members that don't know exactly what is your function and what you can do to support them to better perform their roles. Yeah. And say that you cannot compete, as I think is a bit said, Hammer. Yes, you cannot compete with them because you are not a manager in this role, in this function. You are not a management.
Yes.
No way, and you are not a board. But you can deliver value, great value, and the way of educating them is to perform, to deliver, to present yourself of doing things that they will have a better performance. Also, promoting your own assessment with them. Because from there, you can have insights and data to discuss your function. That's the way I did for many years with many new directors or new managements.
Yes. Thank you, thank you. So what we're hearing here is that the corporate secretary, and the chief governance officer can help him or herself in terms of elevating their status and authority in the company, but also that external assistance, whether it is through external training, et cetera, is also useful. So a combination of those things. Also having the data to support the importance of your position is what I'm hearing as well from Turu. And also doing things that show that you can add value. So I know someone mentioned, it might have been Kathryna, who said, you're not just there to present data, but also to interpret and give critical analysis to the board. There's several things that I know corporate secretaries do. I do it on a daily basis. You don't just provide data, you interpret that data and you give a critical analysis of what that data is showing and convert that data to information that the board can use in order to develop and advance their governance agenda and drive the company. Yes? I think we have a hand up. Elsabe, I'm going to come back to you. I think you wanted to say something, but we have a hand up.
Zara's hand is up, so you can.
Zara's hand is up. Thank you very much.
Arthur also has his hand up, so he could come back again after, but let's hear Zara first.
So Zara, let's go. Your turn.
Thanks, Frances. I think it's also very much a case of corporate culture. We've had cases in South Africa, and Elsabe will be able to probably expand on that, where in the private sector, the corporate secretary was up against a very dominant CEO. I think you're all very familiar with the Steinhoff case. And then in the public sector, a very dominant and powerful chairman. So I think it's very much a case of, although the corporate secretary and governance professional, it is partly how they demonstrate their skills and what they bring to the value they bring to the board that's going to convince the board, how they educate the board. But in cases where you have this situation, it's also quite difficult for the corporate secretary to speak up for fear of being victimized by a dominant CEO or chairperson. So I think it very much depends on the situation that the corporate secretary is going to find themselves, whether they are able to actually do that. And it's a very difficult situation because yes, they have a duty of care and they do have to speak up when something is wrong. But how do you do that in a situation where you are actually at risk of losing your job or being victimized within that situation? Thank you, Frances.
Thank you, Zara. Very good question. Elsabe, would you like to sort of take up that question and anything you want to build on that?
Yeah, and perhaps just moving back to the education question is one of the key things, and linking it to Zara's comment now about corporate failures in South Africa, whether they be private or public. There is nothing like a corporate failure and directors being held liable to show the value of a good company secretary, because they are the only person standing between whatever can happen in court and yeah, so the record keeping, the process that is implemented by the company secretary, we often think that it's just process, but it's only process until things go wrong, and then it's what stands between you as a director and trouble. And I think that has focused the mind probably more than in other jurisdictions in South Africa about the importance of the role. And we have, I think, Zara, a lesser problem in terms of the importance of the role. Yes, there's always a corporate culture issue, and there's always the problem of what do you do with the dominant CEO, and what do you do with a board that is just not listening to you. And those are the difficult questions, but that's never going to go away. That's human nature, I guess. And the education bit around sustainability and ESG and ethics specifically is the important bit that we should leave with our directors and with management. I think is somebody placed it in the chat. There's also an education role about the importance of what we do in the call outs we make from a management perspective, and providing them with cover should there be trouble in future. I hope that adds to the conversation.
Definitely. All right. Is there something along the lines, I'm coming back now to the whole broader stakeholder conversation, where we recognize that we have a new element of governance coming up, which is ESG, environmental, social, and governance reporting, and so on. And I think this is another opportunity to also raise the profile of the Chief Governance Officer, because it naturally falls under that umbrella. You're not going to put that with the CFO. You're not going to put it with, unless the CEO wants to do it, and I think he would have other things to do. He'll be ultimately accountable, but somebody has to be the executive responsible for it. What opportunities do you think having the responsibility of ESG brings for the Chief Governance Officer role? Kathryna, you mentioned that ESG is now an important part of your role, as it is mine. So I would love to hear your views.
Yes, well, that's an opportunity, as you said, to foster cross-functional interactions, to put forward the strategy of the company. So you have a role there where you gather all the elements, so the sustainability, the environmental side of things, the CSR side of things, the governance side of things, package it together and ensure that at that strategic level, the board is made aware so that it can be incorporated in everything. And also to formalize the reporting structure. We are at a very embryonic stage of getting the ESG reporting in line. But so far, it has been a really good opportunity for the governance officer to interact with other cross-functional. I mean, and that really feeds into the chief governance officer title, right? You're almost like a CEO because you are in everything, and you're pulling it together, and you're helping, bring some structure to that very critical and emerging trend. So
Yes.
that's how I see that. Yeah.
Funny you should say that, because you are almost like the CEO, except the bright side is that you're not accountable for the numbers and the performance of the company, but you. So
yes, and the CEO relies heavily on you, right?
Correct, yes. Correct. That has been my experience. The CEO relies heavily on you to basically act as a liaison, not just simply as a corporate secretary would do before, but you have to understand the bowels and the mechanisms of the business and help the business to frame those ESG metrics and KPIs and so on in order to deliver and report. Because as we realize, ESG is no longer nice to have. It is something that is fundamental, because that is what stakeholders expect.
No one is going to do business with you if you don't have those things in place. Yes.
Correct. And the implication as well. So this comes back to the value that the chief governance officer is bringing, because you also find that some of your suppliers internationally, if even you felt in the corner of your world, it's not law yet, as it isn't in the Caribbean as yet. No. The point is, some of your suppliers will not deal with you if you don't adjust the way you are manufacturing. Your company is not manufacturing your products.
Your carbon footprint.
And so on. Yes. So for the chief governance officer to be playing a role, tying it back to what we're talking about, in terms of ensuring that the company is in fact aggressively pursuing that, the chief governance officer is adding tangible value to the sustainability of to the performance, and ultimately the sustainability of that business.
And
I'd love to throw that out there.
Ultimately to the profits, right? Perfectly said. Yes.
Yes. Any comments on that, Taru? And from the audience, please feel free to go ahead, Taru.
You can bring, you as a governance officer, you should bring this external vision and external demand, for instance, new demands, for instance, ESG, risk, ESG, and others, and technology, for instance, and discuss this with the chairman and design a proper agenda in the board. So it's not easy. It's why, and I agree with Elsabe about the importance of the relationship dimension of the role. Yeah, you have to know how to properly talk and influence strategically the board agenda, and knowing that there is a chairman and management with their characteristics. Yes, you know each one very well. Yeah, not only internally but also
correct.
Yeah. Doing this link. Yeah.
And you said something very interesting there. One key word that is also very important, tied to ESG, tied to compliance, tied to business performance, business continuity. Yeah. There's a very small word with huge impact that is tied very significantly, in my view, to the role of the chief governance officer, and that is risk. What's your view on the role of the chief governance officer in managing risk? We're talking risk on a broad basis now. Reputation risk is one of those things. What comments do we have from the panel on that in terms of managing risk? Elsabe, you want to volunteer?
I'll volunteer. I haven't specifically thought about that, but I guess the role is not. I always say we're a bit of a jack of all trades, master of the Companies Act, our role, and everything really touches us. And you cannot turn away from any discipline in the organization. You need to know a bit about everything. And reputational risk is something that really knocks on our door from various directions, specifically around because governance failures is, of course, such a huge, big contributor to reputational risk. So I don't think we can say to ourselves, and in a large organization such as ours, we have a specific risk function with heaps of risk officers running through the business and reporting up through to the risk committee eventually through various management structures. But I think I was on one of these previous sessions, and one of the company secretaries said they don't attend all the management committee meetings, but the one that they do attend is risk. And I think that was for me also quite an important sign that you could probably get away with not being at the, whatever you want to call it, the finance committee or something, but you can't step away from the risk as a group company secretary. It's inherent in what the board needs to consider in terms of strategy, and yeah, its importance is sometimes, I think, a bit understated.
Thank you. Thank you. Any further comments? Anyone would like to add on that point around risk and the importance of the role of the Chief Governance Officer?
Frances, if I can, oh, sorry, Teru.
No, please.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Thanks, Frances. I just wanted to also talk about in the context of risk. We have recently, in fact, in May, we released a report which was based on a survey we did amongst the CSIA member countries. And it was really looking at what is the role of the corporate secretary in relation to risk post-pandemic. Because generally, yes, the corporate secretary does need to be aware of the risks, and they need to bring that to the attention of the board so that that influences their decision making. But they don't generally, each department will be responsible for risk management. But what we found is that the board is very much reliant on the corporate secretary to pull together all of that information around the risks. I mean, there's internal, external risks that they need to be aware of. And we've spoken earlier about how the corporate secretary needs to have that liaison both internally and externally with stakeholders. So they need to be aware of these risks. And we looked at 3 specific areas around risks that the organization is facing post-pandemic. It's regulatory requirements that are constantly changing. It's ESG, which is, of course, a very important factor. And then we also looked at technology. And it is not a traditional role for the corporate secretary. And in most instances, including ESG, there's a lot of development and skills development for the corporate secretary around those areas. But they are such an important link between the operations of the organization and the board, and bringing all those risks to the attention of the board, that they need to be that link when it comes to technology as well. And there is a very rapid move towards GRC technology now, where it's going to be so much more efficient to identify those risks, to monitor those risks, and to be able to report on those, that the corporate secretary is going to be very critical in introducing that whole concept of GRC technology and digitalization in the area of risk. So I would encourage you to have a look on our website. You'll find the report there about the role of the corporate secretary in post-pandemic regarding risk. And that role has definitely expanded quite exponentially.
Thank you so much, Zara. I think without a doubt, risk is something, as I said, a small word with huge implications. Risk is something that you, as a governance officer, the chief governance officer of an organization, it is fundamental and critical to be able to consolidate and be able to ensure that there are structures in place and inform the board of what is happening out there, what trends are taking place, and also how current risks are being managed. Not that you're responsible for managing those risks, but advising the board about how they're being managed and giving them a certain level of assurance as to how it's being done. Another area I would like to throw out to the panel that I don't want to say is now stuck under the umbrella, but I'm not saying it in a negative way, but you can't get around it, and that is the brand of your organization, how you are portrayed. It's tied to the company's reputation and so on, how you relate to your external stakeholders, how they receive you, how your company is perceived. When I say you, I mean the company, how the company is perceived. What do you see as the role of the chief governance officer in helping to shape how the company is viewed by its stakeholders and external relationships and so on? I see Latoya has her hand up.
Hi, yes, I did, Fran, and it was actually to make a quick comment in relation to the topic on risk. And I actually think that it's very interesting that what was pointed out, one of the things that was said by Elsabe was the way that the corporate secretary / chief governance officer actually operates almost like a jack of all trades. And then the point was made in terms of creating a link between the elements of risk by, forgive me, I think that was Zara. So what I actually wanted to identify was to tie back to something that Teru mentioned very briefly earlier, which is influence. And by understanding, by operating in this linked space across multiple disciplines within the company, what then happens is that you can actually learn to manage your influence. So in those cases that we discussed earlier, where a corporate secretary may not individually have weight against a difficult chairman or difficult CEO, what you might be able to do is relate with other persons on that level. So get your chief financial officer to tie in how ignoring certain areas of governance ties back to financial risk, ties back to reputational risk. And I actually think that's a very key position that the chief governance officer in any organization plays. You have to play that role well in order, if your way of bringing it across can't get it done, in order to fulfill your role, you have to find the points of influence that will actually take you to that point that will protect your company in the long term.
Thank you, Latoya. Well said.
Francis, may I interrupt you?
Of course.
Now, talking about the risk, I would like to add just a little comment. I'd like to know the opinion of my friends here is, how is the risk, how to evaluate the risk if the board is not adding the value that the stakeholders they need from the company? There are a lot of research showing that most of the boards are not adding the value that the clients or the stakeholders wait. So, and we are talking about the role of the company secretary or the CGO. And my question is, how can we measure as CGO if the board is adding the value that we expected from the company? How is our role to assemble the correct board, the correct person, the correct talents in the board? Or if we are conducting the board evaluation properly, to identify the gaps and to identify what is not helping the board to function as a team and to provide the values that we expected or the stakeholders expect. So I believe this is a good issues related to risk as well.
Yes, I agree with that. Anyone wants to take those issues? There are a lot of things wrapped up in there, the composition of the board, the skills, how they work together, the value that they're adding, and the risk that brings for the company if it doesn't work well. Anyone wants to take that up?
Yes, Arthur mentioned board evaluation. I find board evaluation as a very, very important tool to measure the effective governance and the performance of the board, for instance. The CGO should design, his ability to design a very good assessment, because he knows from a different perspective what is going on in your board. So you should contribute in designing a specific assessment that address key issues, like if the board is considering stakeholders' demands, views, and other risks, and ESG, for instance, and put it into discussions. I find board assessment very, very important and useful tools for that.
Yes, organizing, designing the board assessment
Yes.
is one of the key functions, I think, of the Chief Governance Officer.
Yeah.
And another place where he, she, or they can have influence in terms of making sure you have directors who understand their role, understand what they're supposed to be doing, and understand your role as well. Okay, because that should be part of the assessment. You know, what is the expectation of the company secretary, how the company secretary is performing, or the chief governance officer is performing, and so on. So there's several, what's coming out in the discussion is that there's several ways in which the corporate secretary can help shape how their role is viewed. And sometimes we need to sort of use the tools that are available to us in-house, as well as external sources to sort of achieve that. Any comments, any further comments on that? Before I...
Well, perhaps, Frances, if I can just add, sorry, Arthur, perhaps just adding to the only way to influence the board's contribution is not just through the assessment. I think there's also in terms of the composition, and one does that by just making sure that the skills matrix of a board is regularly assessed, and pointing out the issues in terms of either skills or succession planning that needs to be addressed, and assisting in the recruitment, making sure that the right recruitment firm is appointed, that the right process is followed, so that the correct directors are actually brought on board, and it's not just a friend of a friend that gets the nod for the position. So there's that angle as well, in addition to the assessment. I just wanted to add that.
Yes, exactly. Spot on. Skills matrices are key. Yes, because gone are the days where, you know, directors come and they just have coffee and tea and have lunch and, you know, reminisce on good old times. There is a process, and the group governance officer, or this, I shouldn't say group, I'm falling back to my thing. The chief governance officer should ensure that skills matrix, one, exists, and two, should be refined in accordance with the company's needs, in accordance with the strategy and where the company sees itself going in the future. From that standpoint, perfectly correct. Exactly.
Frances, may I interrupt you again? Just a question. This skill matrix is at least here in Brazil, some companies, how I say, show it publicly, others not. And others, of course, is not provided. They don't know what is this. They are not doing it. They are choosing, you know, big guys to be their board members. My question is, I would like to know what is in South Africa experience, this matrix of skills. Is a public documentation, is something that you do publicize it? How you care about this documentation?
Yeah, so it is not everybody shows it, but there is a growing number of companies that have it.
But it's not mandatory. It's not mandatory.
It's not mandatory. No, it's
Yeah.
but what we do is we have it in the integrated report, and we show the skills that the board has, and we show why we think it's important that the board has those skills. And we also report on the skills that we would like to bring onto the board in future recruitment drives. So, but it is not mandatory, no. It is considered good practice or best practice, but there's not a requirement as far as I'm aware. Zara may help, but I don't think so.
Great, thank you.
Most welcome.
Yeah, as here in Brazil, it's a best practice, but not the companies do not even do. Yeah, I think most of the companies do not do this, but it's a very good tool also for renovation of the board. When you are renovating the board, also it's a very.
And Teru, as we are talking about role, and we know that some companies in Brazil, the CGO is preparing this skill matrix. So I would like to know in South America, who is preparing this skill matrix? The governance officer or other members of the company?
I used to do it myself.
Yeah, in Brazil, I know. Yeah. But in South Africa, who is preparing this skill matrix? Is a CGO area that prepares it?
Yes, it's the governance officer.
Okay, so I believe we're at 1:30. So this conversation it could go on for another hour. I sense. I sense it's going, but we do not have another hour. It has been very engaging with our exceptionally experienced and insightful panelists, and the discussion from the participants as well definitely has been quite engaging as well. So I want to thank all of our panelists, Elsabe, Kathryna, and Teru, for sharing their knowledge with us today and their experience with us. And definitely I benefited from the engagement. And I want to thank the Institute, the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute, on behalf of all of us here on this panel for having us to discuss this very topical and moving topic. Thank you so much.